Slowly inflame my fantasy and open another chapter, moment of lucidity. Somewhere waiting for a sign that show me a direction.
Welcome back to the Metal Exchange. Justin and Chris back with you for another one. This week we go to Italy, 1996, and one of the most unique albums that we've ever covered on the podcast. But before we get there, Chris, my friend, how are you?
I'm doing well. This was definitely another one of those nostalgia albums, so it should be fun to talk about.
Yeah, I agree with you. I have a lot of thoughts, really interesting stuff. But before we get there, or before we get to any of the new music that we've been listening to, we've got some news to break. You want to tell everyone a little bit about it?
Yeah, I think we've hinted at it for a while now, but we are officially launching a Patreon. Some of you know more about it than others so far, but this is going to be our official announcement of it. It's going to launch on April 3rd to coincide with that month's first episode of the month. That's a Monday. And we're really excited about providing some exclusive content that may not be available at all or right away if you're just listening for free. One of the things we've talked about was changing the request process to a subscriber-only situation, and that's kind of how things are going to go going forward. I'm not sure. We haven't talked about how we're going to handle the first episode in April. At least I don't think we have.
Yeah, I think we'll probably take one of the requests that was kind of in the queue, and there's a bunch of them, but starting in May, it'll be kind of Patreon-only requests, so you gotta kind of have to be a member to make requests going forward, and we'll do them on a monthly basis or more frequently as the requests come in. But we're just kind of changing it up a little bit. There's going to be probably 4 different tiers. We'll get into more detail as we get closer to April 3rd. But there'll be some bonus content like priority requests, like we said, additional podcasts that you can only hear on the feed. And then, some monthly chats with us, live chats, which I think will be interesting for some folks as well. So we'll give you more details as we get closer, but we do want to officially announce that we are going live with this in a few weeks, and we would invite you to join. And we obviously appreciate all of your support. It will not prevent you from listening free. You can still listen free to the podcast if that's what you so choose, but it is a little something extra for those that want to contribute.
Yes. Also, we're not 100% knowing of how Spotify has been handling the ad situation. So depending on which platform you're listening on, there may be ads. I don't know. But our goal, and we haven't finalized this yet, but our goal is that all of the top 3 or the three higher tiers will include a feed that is completely ad free. That's
and early access.
Yes, and that's the other thing. We will be giving the subscribers access to the episodes as soon as they're finished being edited, so you won't have to wait until Monday morning to hear the episode. You can get it because sometimes we record several days in advance. Sometimes, depending on like travel plans and things like that, they could even be released a week or two in advance. So that's going to be a small perk as well. And like Justin mentioned, we're going to do a monthly bonus episode that may not have anything to do with metal or music at all. It might just be us just BSing about what we've been watching on TV or movies we've seen or, what's going on in sports. It's just going to be kind of like a free-for-all, if you will, of discussion, which is kind of how me and Justin talk to each other outside of this podcast anyway. So I don't think it'll be all that different from a normal conversation that we would typically have. And I also urge all of you, whether you plan on subscribing or not, to jump into the Metal Exchanges Facebook group and make some suggestions if there's anything you think would be worthwhile to you to be included in this Patreon situation. We are all ears, and we're looking for any sort of feedback. So that's the plan. More information to come, but like we said, April 3rd is going to be our launch date for that. So even if you just want to, give us $1 a month just to throw us a buck and say, hey, we support you, like that's plenty. That means the world to us. And we've been doing this a long time, so we thought, hey, maybe we could put a couple of bucks in our pocket while we churn out these episodes. And we appreciate anything anybody wants to give, but we want to make sure that you get your money's worth as well. So please feel free to send over any suggestions you may have. I think that if we let everybody kind of chime in, we might come up with some really cool ideas that maybe we haven't considered.
Yeah, and that Facebook group for kind of the group chat, if you will, it's facebook.com/groups/metal exchanges. That's where we're at. So join the conversation. Just pop in and say hello. We look forward to hearing from you. And speaking of things you're hearing, what have you heard this week that kind of caught your ear?
3 albums I listened to repeatedly that all came out last Friday, and those. So I'll start with. Let's see. I will start with. My list is all out of order. I'll start with a progressive metal band, Ice Age, who are back from a sabbatical. They're actually from Long Island, so that kind of hits close to home. They just released a new album, Waves of Loss and Power, and I'll be totally honest with you, like, I don't know that this would have been on my radar, and if I ever would have listened to it, had they not been announced as playing at Prog Power this year. I believe they're the opening band on day one. And so curiosity got the best of me, and I went on to Bandcamp, and I bought the first track from this album called The Needle's Eye a few weeks ago, maybe even a couple months ago, and I really dug it. It was really like, it has this kind of throwback to like mid-90s, like Magna Carta prog metal that I really just jived with, and I ended up listening to the whole album several times, and I really liked it.
Wow!
I'm gonna catch hell for this, but I thought I liked it better than the new Haken album.
Wow!
It was easier for me to get into. I mean, the production wasn't as good, it wasn't as technically sound, but I just thought it was. There were catchier songs, and it just kind of sucked me in. And there's like 3 songs that are over 10 minutes long. It's not my usual cup of tea, but I enjoyed the hell out of this. I thought it was really good.
I listened to it twice myself. I don't know that I loved it as much as you did, but I did think that the last track in particular was phenomenal. And there was something about, like, it ends really, really strong. I will definitely keep it in the rotation for a bit just to see how it ages. But really, like I said, that last track, I mean, I would put that up against just about anything I've heard all year. The first 7 tracks didn't catch me quite as much as that one, but I'm glad you liked it. I mean, I definitely spent some time with the Haken, and that's been growing on me. So I kind of have the opposite view, but I can understand why you like it.
Yeah, I'm gonna go back to the Haken because I just feel like I'm like mad at myself for not liking it more. I don't know why
it's not that accessible. It's like
it's good. Don't get me wrong. I enjoy anything that they do, but it just isn't. I can't get over the hump with it, so I'll keep trying. There's a tune on this Ice Age album called "All My Years." It's one of the shorter songs in the album, and it's like prog pop. It's such a good tune. Like, I could totally hear this being on the radio. Really cool tune. Kind of reminds me of like I guess the band that I think of is Spock's Beard. kind of that just really kind of accessible kind of prog rock / metal. Just good stuff. Then the other two albums I listened to were both on the power metal side. One was Frozen Crown, their new album, Call of the North, which I thought was solid, but didn't really blow me away. I liked it I liked it enough. There were some really good tunes on it, but overall, I just thought it was okay. I don't know if it will end up making my year-end list, which I think in and of itself makes it a little bit disappointing, but I don't know. We'll see. Maybe it'll grow on me. But the highlight of the week for me has been this Nanowar of Steel album, Dislike to False Metal. And the more I listen to it and the more I dig into each individual track, which this is arguably the most random album I've heard in years. And it is like if Weird Al made a metal album. Every song has a distinct flavor, whether it's a parody of the opening track is a straight up parody of Ailstorm with the opposite lyrics where it's just about being sober and drinking tea and like energy drinks. It's hilarious, but it sounds like it came right out of the Ailstorm playbook. There's a song that is a Sabaton tribute / parody that Joachim from Sabaton actually sings on to really drive it home. There's a song called Demu Boogie, which is like just this almost like a swing song, almost out of the Diablo Swing Orchestra playbook. There is a song that just it's hysterical, and the Chupacabra Cadabra song is just every time I listen to it, I'm bobbing my head and laughing at the same time. This and Disco Metal, another song, just absolute earworm, and every song is just like a totally different genre, but like done in a metal style. It's just hilarious. It's a hilarious album, and I really, really enjoyed it. This is the first time I've really dug into one of their full length albums, and they're hysterical.
I listened to it once, but in full candor, I had it on in the background while I was doing some work, so I wasn't paying as much attention to it as I should have. But just hearing that, I think I'm going to go back and listen to it when we're done because I'm that curious. I'm going to have to do a deeper dive into this. It didn't grab me the first time, but again, I was only listening with half an ear, so that's why I don't just listen to things once. Sometimes you have to be in the right mood for it to grab you.
This is one of those things where I would recommend you pull up the lyrics while you're listening to this and just read these lyrics for these songs because these guys are hilarious. Like it's some really really good satirical stuff. Like it's the last song is called "The Power of Imodium," and it is right out of the like late '90s, early 2000s Rhapsody playbook. Like every song is like a love letter to a different style of music or a different band. It's really impressive. It's just funny how the album doesn't flow at all because every song is like a totally different, but like in the best way possible. Like if you're just looking for like a catchy album, but also that's going to give you a laugh, maybe like Steel Panther's shtick is worn off for you. Maybe give Nanowar of Steel a turn. And I should point out that they were originally called just Nanowar, and they added of Steel because Rhapsody was forced to add of Fire to their name, so they they changed their name in parody. I mean, that's how serious these guys are about being a parody.
I mean, if you're going to be a parody, be a parody, and they seem to have that market covered.
And let's just not even forget the hilarity of itself of the name of the album is Dislike to False Metal instead of Death to False Metal.
They're cornering all the shtick here. I like it. I had sent you a track by a band called Triumpher, and for my money, this is like Grease's answer to Manowar. These guys are like, they describe themselves as epic metal, and that's really what it is. It's like, get your sword, get your shield, and it's funny because after covering Triumph of Steel just a couple of weeks ago, I stumbled upon this and I was like, my God, it's like listening to a modern Manowar album. But to your point, although I can hear a little bit of Eric Adams in the vocalist singular, I can once I sent it to you, you said to me, and I quote, the singer sounds like Andy Frank from Ivanhoe, Brainstorm, Symforce, and now I can't unhear that. So it's if Andy Frank was singing for Manowar, you've got Grease's Triumpher. Really, really cool. I'll post a track this week. I think it's definitely worth a listen. And one other track that was just released today, the band Silosis on Nuclear Blast Records released their single Deadwood. It came out, like I said, a little bit earlier today or maybe yesterday. If you've never heard of Silosis, it's this really clean-sounding, thrashy, melodic death metal band, and they are really, really good. They've got a bunch of albums out that I really enjoy, and apparently another one that's on the way. So I definitely recommend checking that out.
Have they been on the Prog Power sampler over the years? Because I feel like the name is very familiar.
You know something? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but a quick Google search will tell me. I don't know. Although I feel like the answer would be it's possible because they are on a major label. So I don't know. But
are they Silosis with an S?
Yes.
Let's see.
I don't think so. I'm looking now. I don't see it. Oh,
nope. I have a song from them that I think I got from your recommendation from their Dormant Heart album from 2015.
Yeah, that album is fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. But yeah, the new album's on the way, so something to check out for sure. But let's get to the main event, shall we? It's Labyrinth from Italy. It's 1996. And you picked their No Limits album, which is their debut, which is kind of interesting because when people talk about this band, inevitably they talk about the follow-up release, Return to Heaven Denied. And, you know, here we are, we're almost at episode 150 and we have not covered that album. And I think that's either a gross omission or just really, really interesting because it's one of my favorite albums, but I just haven't picked it yet. And when we finally discussed this band, you went for the debut, which is interesting. And I'm curious what made you choose this one as opposed to any of their other releases.
Probably the main reason was just because it was my first Labyrinth album. I may have gotten it. No, you know what? No, Return to Heaven Denied would have been out by the time that I got this album, but I don't remember why. It might have been on Pat's recommendation because he was the one who bought the album for me. So this was my first Labyrinth album. I don't think it was too long after that I purchased Return to Heaven Denied, but this memory that will never leave me of being in Mike Flaherty's basement, and I believe Ralph played Vertigo, and Flaherty just cranked it like so loud. And I remember hearing that song just blasting and being like, I've never heard anything like this before. This marriage of techno and metal, and like I didn't really know that much about metal at that point. So like this is just blowing me away. And you know, there's really not much in the way of vocals on this song. So like I didn't even know what I was getting myself into. And then so, you know, fast forward to we're at Coney Island High watching Halloween play on December 20th, 1998, if I recall the date. And Pat gave me this album, I believe, as well as Superior's Behind album. I think those are the two albums that he had purchased for me. And I bring it home and I pop it in, and then all of a sudden I play Mortal Sin and I hear this voice. I can't remember if this was my first experience hearing Fabio Leone or if I had Legendary Tales at this point. I don't recall. I may have gotten both albums very close together. But anyway, I have a lot of fond memories of it. And like you said, I just feel like sometimes it's a little bit too easy to just go with the 9.5, 10 out of 10 that, you know, Return to Heaven Denied is going to get, because it just is that type of all-time great power metal album, or just all-time great album. So I thought this would be a little bit more interesting, a little bit more of a challenge, and I kind of assumed that neither of us had listened to it in a while. I think I ended up being right there. So
Yeah, you definitely were, and you said you hit the nail on the head. It's a marriage between metal and techno, which is like, you had never heard anything like it to that point. I'll argue you haven't heard anything like it since. This album is one of the most unique pieces of music you will ever hear because it has the stylings of that power metal that we know Labyrinth would obviously do with Return to Heaven Denied and their subsequent releases. But if you didn't know any better, you would argue this is a completely different band on this album. It sounds nothing like anything that would come after it. I wouldn't even say it's a power metal album in many ways. I mean, there's definitely elements of it with the bass drum, the double bass drum and stuff like that. But for the most part, this is truly a very unique album. And I was kind of going through my mental iTunes in my head, and I was thinking, is there anything else that's like this? I can't think of anything. And if it is, it doesn't get that close. Maybe it's on the fringe, but it doesn't really get close to this because in many ways, it's more techno than metal.
I can't really disagree. And the thing that really drove the whole thing home for me is that as soon as No Limits comes to an end on my iTunes, Return to Heaven Denied starts playing, and immediately you notice how different in 2 years. I mean, not withstanding the fact that they have a completely different vocalist, but like just from a musical standpoint, like the production values will go through the roof on Return to Heaven Denied, and they just kind of settled into a more traditional power metal sound, and kind of that I think like with was it Feel? I couldn't find that in your every time I got to listen to her. I think it was Feel might have been the one song from Return to Heaven Denied that kind of took that Euro beat kind of deal.
Yep.
But the rest of the album was kind of a traditional, power metal album. Whereas like this album, No Limits, has this kind of Eurobeat vibe throughout the entire thing. And just to let the cat out of the bag, we're going to be bringing back our old friend Olaf Thorson, who we spoke to when we talked about Vision Divine's debut album, which came out 3 years after No Limits. He's going to talk to us about this album and probably ask us why we only want to talk about his debut albums that he's done. But we have some questions for him. I especially really would like to know why the hell everybody has a stage name on this on this album. Like Joe Terry and company, and Olaf Thorson's not even Olaf's real name. His was a stage name too. He just kept his, but everybody else went with these like anglicized versions of their name. They're a bunch of Italian dudes, and it's like Joe Terry, Chris Breeze, and Ken Taylor. Like, it was so odd. I remember getting the album and thinking to myself, like, are these guys not Italian? Like, what am I missing here?
It's funny because we may as well kind of get right into the lineup, I guess. Joe Terry, otherwise known as
that is Fabio Leone, who we all come to know and love or loathe, depending on who you're asking.
That's right. Anders Rain and Olaf Thorson on guitars. Chris Breeze on bass, otherwise known as Cristiano Bertocci, who is with actually Winrose, which I had no idea, but he's the bass player for Winrose. More on them to come because they've just announced a U.S. tour, but we'll get there. Frank Andiver on keyboards, and I got to be honest with you, and drums, but Frank Andiver goes by another name as well. I think he's been with Oracle Sun and Wonderland. He's done a couple of things since Labyrinth. His real name is Franco Rubalata, and then finally a name that we will be talking about, I think, for much of this episode. Ken Taylor, otherwise known as Luca Contini, on keyboards. And I got to be honest with you, he's on this album, and then he leaves the band, and he's never heard from again. So really, really, really interesting because of the names, as we talked about. But apparently, and this makes a lot of sense, Ken Taylor would go on to do a lot of stuff in the techno world. And it makes perfect sense because, like, if you hear once you hear this album, you will never think of anything else but techno music, I guess. But like,
but he has a name like he's like the cornerback for the New Orleans Saints.
Yes, that's right. It's exactly right. The album comes out November 21st, 1996. And before we do a deeper dive into the album itself, I think it's worth mentioning, if you go back to 1996, obviously you've got your Gamma Rays and your Halloweens and your strong German power metal with Blind Guardian and other stuff. But this is before your Sonata Arctica and before that real big wave of late 90s power metal had come into existence. So while Stradivarius was kind of Finland's answer to Halloween in many ways, Labyrinth, as far as I know, and I'm pretty sure about this, was one of the first, if not the first, big-time power metal band to hit it in Italy. This is before Rhapsody. This is before Pandemonium. This is before Skylark. I mean, like, this is like the cutting edge of Italian power metal right here.
Yeah, this was off of the Underground Symphony label, which, like, I'm looking through this list of bands that were on it, and it's wild, like Cryonic Temple and Eddie Antonini and even Power Quest's first album was on this label, and Pandemonium, who you just named. A lot of names that you would recognize: Shadows of Steel, Six Magic, Skylark. Like this was, I guess, an Italian-based. Definitely Italian-based label. Still active for that matter. So. Yeah, like it's really it's a really interesting time, and yeah, like you said, like it kind of predates. To me, like there's like these kind of eras of power metal, and like you have like the early era is like where the Keepers kind of get things rolling, and then there's like this early to mid 90s like glory period of, and we've talked about a ton of albums from this time with like Gamma Ray's Land of the Free and Halloween with Master of the Rings and Time of the Oath, and there's just a Stradivarius's Episode and Fourth Dimension and Angra's Holy Land and Angel's Cry. There's so many of these classics, and then like you said, then in the late 90s you start getting more of these bands like Camelot and Rhapsody and Sonata Arctica, and then in the early 2000s there's you start to get your Dragon Forces and your Power Quests and that kind of deal. So this is interesting that Labyrinth would kind of kickstart in 96 and make an album that really didn't fit in with the rest of these other albums that came out. And maybe they're just, and there wasn't a ton of Italian power metal at this point in time. There would be going forward, but these guys are
kind of the catalyst. Yeah, I completely agree with you. And going back, you had mentioned about you kind of choosing it because it had been a while, and it had the production on this album. Boy, it could use a makeover, and I don't fault them because, quite frankly, a lot of those Underground Symphony albums were not the greatest sonically sounding albums, but the production here is just. I feel like if they cleaned it up, this would be a monster album in terms of just sonic, I don't know, just clarity or whatever, but it's just lacking the clarity that Return to Heaven Denied would have just 2 years later. Yeah,
it's definitely flat sounding. It really speaks to the quality of the music that it in a lot of ways rises above what's a substandard mix, and that'll be definitely something that we'll talk to Olaf about, because I mean, when you think about by the time Vision Divine's self-titled album comes out, like they got production down to a science just 3 years later. That first Vision Divine album sounds fantastic, and honestly, so does Return to Heaven Denied, which came out the year before that. But I mean, who knows? I mean, they probably were working on a limited budget and whatever. We'll get into that with him when we speak to him. But I forgot that it. Maybe just because at the time it wasn't as noticeable, but now that you go back at however many years, almost 30 years later, it's quite noticeable how the mix is. Like this album did not come out in 1984. This is not Into Glory Ride. This is 1996, and like when you compare it to an album like The Time of the Oath that Halloween released in 1996, which I think still sounds amazing, it kind of falls flat in that respect. I think that might be really the only area, though, in which the album suffers, quite honestly.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And without further ado, let's kind of get into it. You had mentioned that opening track, Mortal Sin. I know normally I'll kind of lead us in with that first track, but talk to me about your thoughts, like when you hear this for the first time about Mortal Sin, and like what were your thoughts when you were hearing this for the first time? Because it does start with a very ominous sounding keyboard intro.
Yeah, it's ominous is a good word for it. And then it's like it's ominous, it's dark, and then it just kicks in, and all of a sudden it just speeds up, and it's kind of like this perfect introduction to this album. And I, after like re-listening to the album, I connected the most with this song, and I think just because it's one of the best songs on the album, first of all, but I think just because it was like the first song on the first album of the Labyrinth, the first Labyrinth album I ever owned, I just hear it and it just takes me back. So I don't know that I've ever made a first song on an album my song of the week. This could be the first time, but this was the one that I think really hit me the hardest going back and listening to it.
Well, without further ado, let's give it a listen, shall we? So this is your song of the week, no question?
This is my song of the week.
Let's give it a listen, and I'll share my thoughts when we come back. You know, it's funny. This is not my favorite song on the album, although I do think it is a phenomenal opener. Some immediate thoughts that hit me when I was listening back this week. Number one, the guitars are kind of way back in the mix. And I don't know why that is, but like I always thought of this as Olaf's band, but yet the guitars are so far back in the mix that they almost get lost and overshadowed by some of the other sounds. Number two, the cymbals are just very tinny sounding, and it feels like it's it kind of lacks the low end and the high end, but it's got this very tinny sounding cymbals. And even though it's not the fastest track, it's deceivingly heavy. I think that the instrumental section is particularly good because I love the dueling solos between the guitar and the keyboards. I think that's a really nice touch. And it's the word I would kind of describe this song as is frenetic. It's kind of like all over the place, in your face. And then when Fabio actually sings, it's like really just like a real, punch to the face because it's a very powerful song. And I can't imagine it opening with anything else, although I wouldn't say it's my number one track on the album.
Yeah, I feel like it kind of sets the stage for the rest of the album being very heavy, at least sonically heavy on keys and drums, and like the bass guitar is almost inaudible in parts, and the guitars really, I think, shine more so in the solos than anywhere else.
Completely agree.
Just because I feel like the rhythm part of it is really carried by the keys in this situation. It's a very key heavy album, which might be part of the reason I enjoy it so much. But you really you're right about the drums. Like, it's tinny, but yet at the same time, the drums are very loud. Like they're very prominent in a way that the bass and the guitars aren't as much. So like, to me, you just hear a lot more keyboards and drums than anything else.
I couldn't agree more. And then we get into Midnight Resistance, which is the second track. This one starts with a guitar solo, so it's like almost the opposite of what we just said insofar as it actually starts with a guitar solo over this really kind of cool drum fill. I love this track. And this was a track that I kind of grew on me over time because I always liked it. But as I went back and I listened to it a bunch this week, it became one of my favorite tracks on the album. And it's a little bit slower pacing. And the way that the verses are, it's almost like ethereal sounding, I guess is the word I would use. And then the chorus is just faster and heavier and in your face. And then it transcends back into that like ethereal sound. Really, really well done. And I love the dynamic again between the verses and the chorus. But one of the highlights for me really is the outro where they have this acoustic guitar, which is just unexpected in many ways. It reminds me a lot of what New Horizons is on Return to Heaven Denied, just in terms of the way the song is structured. But I think this is a phenomenal track. Yeah,
I agree. It's a really good tune. Like just another really strong song to kind of kick off the album, which I think is a little bit stronger on the front end personally.
Memorable, if nothing else.
Yeah. But yeah, this is a cool song. I always, as a kid, I thought it was cool that they said "Ride the Sky." Like I felt like that was a nod to Halloween in a way. But yeah, this is another really good tune. I like this one quite a bit as well.
And then the third track is a song called Dreamland, and this one's interesting for a whole different reason. It's one of the shorter songs of the album. It's only 3 minutes and 44 seconds, but it's kind of proggy, more so than it is power metal, in my opinion. And I got to be honest, what sticks out here for me is the drum performance. I think it's phenomenal. It's a bit of a deeper cut, even though it's like on the front of the album, but it reminds me a lot of When Dreamin' Day Unite by Dream Theater, or something that could have been on that album. Drum heavy, keyboard heavy, questionable production, and proggy. Like it just, to me, it's like this could have been on Dream Theater's debut, and you wouldn't have questioned it.
Yeah, except the vocals are a little bit better on this one.
Sorry, Charlie.
Yeah, sorry. That's nothing against Charlie. I like Charlie, but Fabio, I mean, like this young Fabio that hasn't ravaged his voice with cigarettes yet. Not that you could tell the difference, but I mean, this has got to be like a early 20s Fabio Leone, just like golden throated in all of his glory. Just he sounds so good, even though the mix is not great. And I feel like on Legendary Tales by Rhapsody, which would come out the following year, like they did a really hell of a great job producing his vocals on the album in a way that I think this album lacks a little bit. But I mean, you could still hear that, just that there's like a future star in the making here. But yeah, this is another cool tune. I like I just like the way that the keys kind of lead it in with the drums. Again, it's a very keys and drums kind of. You don't really hear a lot of albums where it's like the keys and drums are leading the way. It's either like, bass and drum heavy, or key and guitar heavy, or just guitar heavy. It's a weird combo, but it works.
Unique album. It really is unlike anything you've ever heard, in my opinion. I just really unique. And you had mentioned how the front half might be a little bit stronger than the back half. If for no other reason, then the next three songs, and I'm not going to talk about them together, but the next three songs are so powerful that I would argue the middle of the album is actually where like this album's bread is buttered, if you will. The first of which was the first and only single on the album, Piece of Time. It's a very short song. It's well less than 3 minutes. But this one, it starts with like a Fabio Leone vocal solo over the drums, which is awesome. And then it's this upbeat, melodic, gallopy number. And it's these little nuances that I think make this song, including like the bass lines, which you finally hear prominently in the mix, and these guitar noodles, which are just like really, really catchy. And if I was going to play a song for someone that's never heard the band, it's got to be Piece of Time, and I guess it makes sense why it was the first single.
Yeah, it's a very probably one of the most accessible songs on the album. Just a really solid mid-tempo, catchy, like nothing that you didn't already say. really good tune, and makes a lot of sense that it was chosen to be the single for this album. And In the Shade, I guess, would have been considered, I guess, the B-side of that single, because the single was Piece of Time, In the Shade, and then the two bonus tracks that would end up on the end of this album as well. So I kind of consider like those that were kind of the showcase songs, if you will, before this album was released. And they're arguably two of the best songs on the album, so I can understand why. But this is a good one. I don't think the two times that we've seen Labyrinth play live, I don't think they played this song. I would have liked to have heard it.
They haven't, and that was a little disappointing, but they did play something else, and you alluded to it earlier in terms of what that song is, but we'll get there in a second. Before we do, you had mentioned Vertigo as being like that song that you heard in the basement with the music blaring and everything else. I know this is, for all intents and purposes, is a cover, and it's a cover of an artist named Rex A. Obviously, I don't know who that is, but this song is just techno all the way through, and quite frankly, I'll tell you a little story about this song, and I don't even know if I've ever told you this, but a lot of my friends in college were into the whole techno and the club scene and everything else, and I remember playing them Vertigo like really, really loud on my stereo system in my house. We were 18, 19 years old, and these were guys that like just loved that whole club scene, yada, 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 and they were into this song. They could totally get into it because it was really just a logical extension from what they were listening to with that, that underground techno stuff that I still to this day don't quite appreciate. But this song is phenomenal. And although I don't know what it means to smash on the West, the drums here actually do set the tone quite well, just because it's that tinny cymbal on this and that like sound just drives this whole song. I love it. I wish the guitars were a bit higher in the mix, but if the club scene sounded like this, I would be all over it.
Yeah, we would have probably went to Mirage a little bit more than we did.
Yeah, 100%.
Funny you should mention college, because I would play this song for Knops and Matt and some of my friends in college, and I talk about Knops. I think I pushed too much power metal on him when he was really more of a prog guy. We just didn't figure that out until later on. But this was one of those power metal songs.
Now he's telling me to go listen to the new Periphery album earlier this week. So
exactly. But this was a song that he freaking loved. Like, I would play this song for anybody that would listen. Like, I always found this to be a really good gateway for somebody who wasn't that into metal, because that techno part of it can kind of bring them into that way, because it's so catchy in that sense. There's not a lot of there's not a lot of words or vocals. So like if the high pitched power metal vocals is a turnoff for you, there's really none of that here. So the way that it was like my introduction to Labyrinth and Fabio Leone, for that matter, like I'll never forget that just visceral feeling that I had hearing it for the first time. Especially, like you said, you got to play it really loud. Like just hearing it blast, it gives it a whole nother vibe. But like this to me is a song that when I hear it, it's one of the most important songs that I heard in like when we were in high school, as far as like just something that I heard for the first time and just really instantly resonated with me. And it's something that I would try to pass on to others. And I think Knops could speak to that this is a song that he'll always remember and think of fondly.
Well, yeah, well said. I think that's awesome. And I guess we had similar, stories and used it similarly. But the one thing we didn't mention is how this song doesn't really end. It goes right into the next track, which you mentioned, In the Shade. And I love how it does that. I think it's just an awesome effect. And In the Shade was an album that we did get to hear live the first time we saw this band back at Prog Power. And that was one of the absolute highlights of the set for me. I couldn't believe that they were playing a song off of this album. And I'm not sure that I could have picked a better song, because it might be my favorite on the album. It's very heavy. It's got these soaring vocals. And when we saw Rob Tyrant sing it live, or Roberto Taranti sing it live, he was phenomenal. And I love the verses, and the chorus just gets stuck in your head for days. And what I love about this song is that really at one point or another, every single instrument has a chance to shine. I love it. And I want to hear your thoughts, but I am going to make it my song of the week. So I want to give it a listen first, and I'll let you share your thoughts when we get back. Just an absolutely memorable song. I would be shocked if you didn't share some of my sentiments on that, but I want to give you the floor. Talk to me about In the Shade and why this was kind of the second, not the second single, but the B-side to the A single.
It's probably again one of the most accessible songs on the album. I always had it connected to Vertigo in my library. I had joined the tracks when I ripped the CD. Because to me, like I don't like listening to Vertigo and then not hearing In the Shade immediately afterwards. They re-recorded this song with a different vocalist. I don't know if it was Roberto. There was a different singer named Morby who sang on the Timeless Crime EP in between Return to Heaven Tonight and Sons of Thunder. But they did a remake of this song, which, if you wanted to hear a song from No Limits with a little bit better of a production value, I would point you in the direction of that. I don't know that the vocal performance is as good as Fabio's here, but, great song. To kind of, piggyback on your, comments about seeing them the first time they played, at Prague Power. I will never forget, you were on the rail with Pat, and I was a couple of rows behind you with Mike. And every time they started playing a song, you just turned around and looked at me and just shook your head like just it, in the way that said, holy shit, I can't believe this is happening right now. I will never forget you just turning around and just looking like mind boggled. And then when they played this song, you were so happy. I just remember that look on your face. I will never forget it. So,
I gotta be. I'm like a mark for this band, and I'm not going to say that there were some albums that I didn't care for as much as those first three, but whether it's this, Return to Heaven Denied, an all-time classic, and even Sons of Thunder, which I think is an underrated album. I don't know if the band particularly cares for the album, but I actually like it quite a bit. I think those first three albums are just gold in a time period where I was in my power metal, I was the biggest power metal fan around at that time. So it strikes a chord with me. But yeah, I marked out completely when they played this, and I'm sure I'll never get to see it again. So at least we got the memories of the first one.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was something. We talked about this, before we recorded, but, the idea of this album getting redone, like not just cleaned up, but just re-recorded with a modern sound, I think that would be really cool.
I think you'd have to get Ken Taylor back on the keys. I'm not sure that anyone could do this. I mean, yes, you could play.
I thought you were going to say I'm not sure anyone could find him.
That's also possible. But I don't know. I just feel like the keys are so distinct. Not that it's not the most technical. It's not Jordan Rudess on the piano, but at the same time, it's so Ken Taylor, if you will, on keyboards.
Yeah, very unique.
Yeah, for sure. That's kind of the end of the first half of the album. The second half of the album kicks off with No Limits, the title track, and it's really your first ballad. It's kind of a power ballad. It's like it starts off with this slow melodic guitar sound and then complemented well by the keyboards. I think it has like this very big, powerful chorus feel to it. And it's kind of the epic on the album, right? It clocks in at almost 7 minutes, and it's about a minute or so longer than every other track on the album. It's what I like about this more than anything else, I think, are these really simple keyboard solos that kind of happen a couple of times throughout the whole song. But what's interesting is it sounds like my sister's Casio from when she was like learning to play the piano, because it sounds so primitive in terms of, it doesn't sound full or powerful, but they're really cool keyboard solos.
Couldn't agree more. This is, for me, kind of like where the album kind of falls off a little bit after this. I really like this song. It's a really chill kind of tune, and yeah, like those keyboards are kind of, yeah, that primitive is a good way of describing it. But this is a kind of a nice song. It's something a little more mellow than what we've heard so far, especially like you consider we've kind of run the gamut on tempos on this album. You know, Vertigo is like a complete like, just, I mean, it's well named. I'll just say that. You know, but like, good. There's parts in Mortal Sin that are super fast, and then there's, you know, songs like In the Shade, which is heavy, but also kind of more of a mid-tempo kind of song. This one kind of dials it back a little bit, and like you said, I don't know that I consider this like a true ballad. It's more of a just kind
Power
of slower,
ballad, I would say,
like a slower song. Like when we get to Time Has Come, like
that's
that,
a ballad.
That's the ballad, the big ballad of the album. But this is a pretty cool song. I just like that they didn't make a million songs that sounded the same. Like I was gonna say, you know, regarding that Ice Age album I was talking about before, like I find that a lot of the album sounds similar to the point where like I'm not always so sure which song I'm listening to, and so that's not always a great thing. I feel like with this album, every song really has its own kind of flavor, and you really know what song it is, but at the same time it flows really well in spite of that. So and that's always a sign of a strong album, in my opinion, provided that the songwriting and the performance is actually good. Because you could have all those things and it could be terrible. But in this case, this is not that. And again, it's so interesting to me how the band, like Return to Heaven Denied was kind of a natural progression, but it's almost like it kind of reminds me of like Zelda 2, where like they never went back and made a game quite like that one ever again. And that's kind of like that's what No Limits is. It's the Zelda 2 of Labyrinth albums. I bet you never heard anyone say that before.
No, that's definitely a first, and I wish I could argue. I can't. It's different. It's unique. It's one of a time. It's one of a kind. It's the Zelda 2 or the Super Mario Brothers 2, right? Like that.
Or the Castlevania 2.
There you go. Exactly. So without turning it over to Mr. Belmont, talk to me about The Right Sign and your thoughts on this track. I'll just say, for my money, again, this screams like late 90s club scene to me. Like, I don't know that it's my favorite song. It's very heavy techno inspired. It's kind of mid-paced, vintage. How's that for a good word? Vintage Olaf Thorson guitars. It's so distinct on this track. And I do like the layered vocals as well, but the song's a little bit repetitive for my taste. And so I don't think it's my favorite track by any means, but there are elements of this which I love.
Yeah, I like the chorus a lot on this song, and I like the intro, the techno-y kind of intro to it. The rest of the song is kind of middle of the road for me, but it's a pretty solid tune. But again, like I feel like we're kind of losing steam a little bit at this point, because there were just so many really strong songs up until this point, especially those first 6 or even 7 tracks. Were just I really just enjoy that whole beginning and middle of this album so much that I feel like this little kind of area before you get to Time Has Come, it kind of dips a little bit. Not a lot, but a little.
I'm a little surprised you say that about Red Zone, the next track. And the reason I say that is this one's a bit more of a hard rocking tune, and it actually has, for me, at least in my ears, elements of their power metal sound, which you'd hear on Return to Heaven Denied, 2 years later. I thought, to me, it's like power metal with a nod to the 80s hair metal scene kind of mashed together. And admittedly, I kind of forgot about this track, but when I kind of dove back in and got towards the end of the album, I realized it's a pretty good tune that I just kind of either overlooked or just simply forgot about, but I thought it would have the elements here that you might actually particularly enjoy.
Yeah, it has the elements. I just don't think that it comes together for me as a song I love. I mean, it's got double bass and like you said, it's really fast. It's got the more of those techno-y keys and some of the key parts are very very 80s, like you said. I just don't know that the song is that memorable for me. Like it's fine, but I just don't like it as much as the some of the earlier tracks we mentioned before. It does have a lot of energy to it, I'll say that, but it just doesn't come together for me. It's one of my least favorite songs on the album, to be honest.
Interesting. And part of the reason for that is, you had kind of alluded to the fact that Time Has Come is it sounds like one of your favorite songs, and that is for sure the true ballad on the album. Talk to us about that. What is it that stands out about this particular track for you?
I just think that it's really well written. The melody is really beautiful. Fabio, I think, really sings his ass off on this track. Because it's not as like fast and heavy, the keys and the drums aren't drowning him out as much. So it's more of a platform or a what's the word I'm looking for? A spotlight on his vocals, which, he's arguably the most well-known person to come out of this album, with almost 30 years of hindsight. I just think this is such a beautifully done ballad, and his high vocals just really soar without sounding obnoxious, I think, which I think in later years some people might accuse Fabio's like really high like note holding note, like those high notes that he holds out, it almost sounds like manufactured in a lot of ways, and some people hate it. I happen to not be one of those people. I've always loved Fabio. Like the first time I heard Legendary Tales, like that was it. Like he was always going to be one of my all-time favorite singers. And that I'm really big on vocalists. Like that's huge for me. So, coming back to this, it was always interesting to me, having Legendary Tales and No Limits as my first two albums of like Fabio, of Fabio Leone's vocals, and how they really it doesn't sound like the same. At times it does, but in other times, like the way that he's able to change his style to fit each band is really interesting to me. And I think that when Vision Divine came out in 1999, he kind of went back to this Labyrinth style that he did rather than more of his Rhapsody style, which I thought was really interesting. Vision Divine, in a lot of ways, that first album is almost an extension of this era of Labyrinth. I'm pretty sure
Yes.
Many of the members of the band on this album will rejoin Olaf and Fabio on that album, which when I remember pre-ordering it or asking Pat to pre-order it probably at the time or asking somebody, and it was initially billed as like a Fabio Leone solo album. But I think in retrospect, it was really him and Olaf together co-writing this album. And to me, it was always like their little nod to this first album, No Limits, that like, hey, we enjoyed working together and we made a cool album, and now we're going to make one that maybe sounds a little bit more modernized and not recorded in somebody's basement or garage. But yeah, getting back to at hand, I think this is a really nice song, and like I always say, I was always drawn to really well done ballads during this time, and this was no exception. What did you think about this song?
I happen to agree with you. I think it really is a Fabio showcase in many ways, and it is a very memorable tune. I wouldn't even call it a hidden gem at the back of the album. I almost chose it as my song of the week, but I wanted to go with something a little more traditional for Don't ask me why, but that's just the kind of mood I was in as we sat down to record. But for my money, this is probably a top 3 or 4 song on the album. And I don't know, I'm just throwing it out there. Maybe they could have closed the album with it, right? Like, did they really need Looking For, which is the next track? I don't know. I just put it out there that is another kind of short ballad that ends this thing. And it was kind of interesting to have 2 in a row, so to speak. Not that it's, I don't know. It's just, it's not that strong of an ending tune for me. And I really would have just dropped it.
It feels like a long outro. Like,
yes.
A lot of outros are like less than 2 minutes long. This is like a 3+ minute, but it doesn't really feel like a full song. It just really feels like kind of a way to exit the proceedings, but in kind of a drawn out sort of way. But I gotta say, this song and some other parts here and there throughout the album really reminded me of early Power Quest, and I wonder if there was any influence there, because I think being that Power Quest is a very heavily keyboard driven band. I wonder if that's just happenstance and it just kind of worked out that way, or if there was any sort of influence there. It could be something to ask Steve the next time we talk to him. But there was something about this song that kind of made me think of a kind of a mellower Power Quest outro as well. So whatever, maybe I just think of Power Quest all the time, no matter what
they
I'm
seem
listening
to be on the brain. So,
yeah, like I'll be listening to the Longest Time by Billy Joel and be like, this reminds me of Neverworld.
Did you happen to listen to the bonus tracks this week? Call Me and Miles Away.
Yeah. So the funny thing about these is that, like, this was just one of those albums where, because I owned the Japanese or the Korean or whatever the Far East, wherever Far East country it was that I got it from, I just always considered these 2 songs part of the album, which is weird because, like you said, Time Has Come really should have been like where the album ended, and then I always thought it was weird that there were 3 more tracks after it, and so it's hard for me. Yeah, it's hard for me to separate these 2 tracks as like just bonus tracks or B-sides. They were originally the tracks 3 and 4 on the Piece of Time single or EP, depending on what you want to call it. They're both pretty good songs. They're I don't think that they compete with most of the songs that are on the album proper, but they're not bad songs. But I understand why they were not part of the first 11 songs proper.
I'll say this about Call Me. To me, this was kind of the first Vision Divine song. I think both of these songs have a lot of I don't think these songs have the same feel as the rest of the album. I think they feel like B-sides, but Call Me sounds like a Vision Divine track.
You know what Call Me made me think of? Made me think of Don't Follow Me by Fate's Warning. That's what the guitar really reminded me of that song. That's just where I went with that.
And yeah, I think it's actually a pretty good tune. In the last 30 seconds, it really just speeds up, which is kind of cool, just out of nowhere. It's a nice change of pace. Miles Away is a little more mundane, a little more vanilla, if you will. Love the extended guitar solo. Very simple song. Probably my least favorite of the 2 bonus tracks.
An even longer outro.
Yeah, exactly. But interesting stuff. And like I said, the reason this album is not a 10 for me is because it's not perfect. I think there are certain tracks towards the back which are not perfect, and the production just suffers. But like, for its novelty alone, this has to get a fairly high rating because there's nothing like this, as I mentioned earlier. I'm curious for you, scale of 1 to 10.
I would give it an 8.25. I think that the songs that are great are really great. The songs that are not as great are good, but not, they're just kind of there. I think the production drags it down a little bit, at least.
It has to.
I think that I think that it's more of an 8.5 or even an 8.75 if it sonically is more pleasing. But that said, I think that the material is so unique. A lot of the songwriting is really strong, and it's just for nostalgia's sake. Like it's the first time, we would hear Fabio Leone and Olaf Thorson, who, we would go on to really herald as both pioneers and very important members of the power metal community, especially out of Italy. So while I can almost promise you that we would give Return to Heaven Denied a higher score, I think that this album really deserves a spotlight, which is why I chose it in the first place. And I think that in spite of it not sounding so great as far as production goes, it still holds up musically, and I really enjoyed going back and listening to it. And like I'd said, it's something I had in the back of my head for a while, and for whatever reason, things would come up, instead. But it was something I was definitely planning on talking about. I'm positive we will do a Return to Heaven Denied episode one of these days, but sometimes it's nice to go a little bit off the beaten path. How about you? What's your score for this one?
I am going to give it the same score, which, considering the production, is a monster score, because if any other album didn't sound so hot, I don't know that I would even give it anywhere near an 8, because it would kind of deter the experience. But there's something almost charming about it because of the fact that it has that techno feel to it, and because the keyboards are so prominent in the mix along with the drums, as we've said countless times. I'm almost inclined to give it an 8.5. I'm not, just because I don't think this, like I said, there's a couple of songs here that are average, more so than phenomenal, but 8.25 for me for a debut album with this production, which probably could use a touch up. Phenomenal score, just a really memorable listen. And if you've never heard this album, certainly listen to our songs of the week, but I would suggest listening to the album as a whole, just because you're missing out if you don't check this out.
Yeah, I expect to get some comments from our friend Adam Askoff on the Metal Exchanges group during the week, because I know that he has some strong feelings about this album, and he even sent us a question to pass on to Olaf, which we will plan on doing. Unfortunately, by the time this runs, the interview will already be recorded. So maybe we'll post something on Facebook before we do the interview, just to see if anybody else has any questions to ask Olaf. But we appreciate that he will be rejoining us, our second repeat guests. I've pretty much messaged everybody in metal, and so now I'm just going back to the to the people that already know that they want to talk to us. So expect just everybody that we've already talked to just come back and talk to us again, since we
got a couple of new things in the pipeline. I kidding aside, we got a couple of things. I just want to mention a couple of news items before I talk about my album for next week. I mentioned earlier that Avenged Sevenfold, who is back with a new single, the single is called Nobody, announced the show at Madison Square Garden as a headlining act. I thought that was very impressive. I was not expecting that. I know they were really big, kind of before they went on a relatively lengthy hiatus, but Madison Square Garden holds 18,500 people. It was a lofty goal. Did you have a chance to listen to Nobody, the single? Because it's gotten some real flack. I don't know that people particularly loved it, or at least not everyone.
Yeah, I listened to it once. I didn't think it was bad, but it didn't really grab me. I thought that M. Shadow's voice didn't sound as crisp or distinct as it has before, and I don't know if that has to do with age or whatever, but it sounded like him, but not quite. I went ahead and pre-ordered the album because I always enjoy what they do, but I'm not nearly a big enough fan to really, I think, critique it deeply. All I can say is I listened to it once and I didn't really feel super strong one way or the other about it.
It just sounded so different than some of their older material that it was jarring in a way. I don't know that the whole album is going to sound like this, but it was different, and some would argue proggy, which is not what you'd expect from a band like that. But nonetheless, Madison Square Garden, here we come. And in tour news,
did they announce any openers for that? show?
They did, but not anybody that I was familiar with.
Okay.
So I no, nothing really on that front. And some tour news: two bands that are playing Prague Power this year, Delane and Visions of Atlantis, are going out on a short run of shows after their appearance at the festival. On September 10th, they're going to play Charlotte. Then they're coming up to the Northeast, going up to Canada, and then finishing out west in LA on September 24th. Admittedly, I'm not going to go see this show because, quite frankly, I'll see both bands in Atlanta, but it's a pretty cool tour package, I have to say.
Yeah, agreed. I'm with you. We'll catch them in Atlanta, as they say. But yeah, agreed. It's cool, and I think that I know that I would have gone out of my way to catch one of these shows had they not been playing at Prague Power this year.
Yeah. And I still have not seen Visions of Atlantis. I missed them on 70K, like I mentioned, because I knew I would be seeing them later in the year, and I went to see other stuff instead. But I'm really curious to see this band live. I've seen Clementine sing live with Serenity, and she's phenomenal. So I have no doubt she'll be fantastic singing with Visions of Atlantis.
Oh, my darling. Also, speaking of bands playing at Prague Power that are going on tour, Rhapsody of Fire, while not playing at Prague Power, are bringing along two bands that are playing at Prague Power, Windrose and Seven Kingdoms, and they're going out on a North American tour because they are playing in Canada as well, and that'll start out in Boston on May 10th and in New York City on June 9th. So that's a cool little bill there of some really cool power metal bands. So again, I think that's another show I probably would have went out of my way to see had 2/3 of the lineup not been playing in Prague Power. But kudos to Seven Kingdoms getting onto another cool tour after playing with Powerwolf. They're getting in that grind. You love to see it. I'll take seeing them a million times opening for bands over Into Eternity any day. I'll say that much.
No, that, and it's also not 2006 anymore. But yes, I agree with you. Which brings us to next week. I was looking.
Please tell me this album came out in 2006. That will make me laugh.
Close. No, this album comes out in 2001. But I was looking back in the archives, and there was an artist that I wanted to cover for a while, and I went back to see when we covered something by this artist, or at least another incarnation of the artist, and I couldn't believe that it had been over a year since we did Strapping Young Lad's City album. We're not doing Strapping Young Lad, we're not doing City, but we are going to do some Devin Townsend solo stuff, because I feel like he's got such a massive discography. We'd be remiss not to do one of his albums. And I'll do the first one I ever heard, which kind of coincided with his Prague Power appearance back at Prague Power 3, and that's his 2001 release, Teria. I have some stories about this album, I have some thoughts about this album, and quite frankly, I just want to listen to it again. So that's what we're going to cover next week.
That's very cool. I do not know. Man, my knowledge of Devin Townsend is not good. I know songs here and there. I really started to listen to his later albums in recent years as I've become more of a fan. I owe a lot of that to Knops. He really got me on the Devin Townsend train finally. So yeah, I'm looking forward to listening to this. I think it'll be good. I'll be curious to see which of these songs were actually played at Prague Power. I don't think I stuck around for too much of his set anyway. But yeah, this is good. I again, like another thing that I just missed out on at the time. So this will be a good chance to make up for that.
Yeah, I think you're going to. It's a very diverse album. I think you're going to have some. I think there's going to be some tracks you love. I think there's going to be some tracks that make you scratch your head. And I think there's going to be other tracks that make you want to listen to it again. So it should be interesting.
That sounds like a description for just about any Devin Townsend album, though, doesn't it?
Also spot on accurate. But hope you enjoyed the show. We look forward to bringing you our interview with Olaf Thorson later in the week. We look forward to bringing you Devin next week. And then as we get closer to April 3rd, we'll give you more info on the Patreon. So again, thank you for your support. In the meantime, Any 5-star reviews would be helpful. They help other people find the show. Give us a like and a follow, and join the chat, facebook.com/groups/metal exchanges. We hope to see you soon.
Yeah, we were going to launch the Patreon on April 1st, but then we were worried that people would think it was an April Fool's joke. So we changed it to April 3rd, which happens to be a Monday, which is when our new episodes drop anyway. Seemed to make more sense. So maybe you'll be a little bit more confident that this is not, in fact, an April Fool's joke. It's actually very serious. And like I said, I just want to echo what I said earlier. Please send us any sort of suggestions you may have. I've already actually received, I'm sure you have as well, a few suggestions from our mutual friend Charles. Really cool, interesting ideas that he has regarding, members sharing playlists with each other, and Zoom chats that will be exclusive to subscribers only. So I think that will really make it worth your while if you choose to subscribe to one of our tiers. We really want to make just give you some real exclusive stuff that makes it worth investing in us. But like we said earlier, anything you want to throw our way is much appreciated, and we'll continue to keep the show free as well on all other platforms. But this just seemed like the next logical step for us after almost 150 episodes. We are approaching soon, which is amazing. We might need to talk about how we plan on celebrating that. So
I think a celebration is in order, no question. But we'll get there. We'll come back. We'll come back to you on Thursday. Enjoy the next few days, my friend, and I will talk to you soon.
All right, take care, my friend.
Time has come.